Hello everyone, this is the fifth and last lecture on electrolysis, and in this lecture we will discuss applications of electrolysis. Now the first application of electrolysis that we are going to discuss is electroplating of metals. The question is, what is the meaning of electroplating? Electroplating is a process in which a thin layer of a superior metal is deposited on the surface of a baser or inferior metal with the help of electrolysis. So by electrolysis, by the process of electrolysis, a thin layer of a superior metal is deposited on the surface of an inferior metal. Now the question is, why the electroplating is done? What is the reasons for doing electroplating? So there are basically two most important reasons. The first is protection of a metal from rusting. So there are so many metals which are not affected due to corrosion, like nickel, chromium. So we can do the electroplating of nickel or chromium on the surface of iron to protect iron from corrosion. There is one more reason for electroplating, and that is to improve the appearance of the metal. Like the electroplating of gold or silver is done on the surface of brass articles. So to improve the appearance of brass articles, we can do the electroplating of gold or silver on them, like in many jewelries. Now the next thing is conditions for electroplating. That is very important part, because there are so many questions which may be asked from this topic. However, this is very small topic. What conditions should we follow for electroplating? So these are very important conditions, and these are to be followed during electroplating. The first condition is that the article which is to be electroplated is to be kept at cathode. Remember, the article which is to be electroplated must be kept at cathode. Now the question may be asked, why? Why the article which is to be electroplated must kept on the cathode? So the answer is because the deposition of metal, you know that the article on which electroplating is to be done, on the surface of this article there must be deposition of the metal, and you know that the deposition of metal takes place at cathode. So because the deposition of metal takes place at cathode, therefore the article which is to be electroplated must be kept at cathode. Now the second point, that the metal from which electroplating is to be done, means the superior metal must always be kept at anode. Again the question is why? Because you know that the metal ions, the active metal ions, will always migrate from anode and they will get discharged at cathode and they will be deposited at cathode. So therefore at anode the metal, the superior metal, must be there. So anode should be made of the metal by which electroplating is done. The third point that you have to remember is about electrolyte. The electrolyte must always contain the metal ion from which electroplating is to be done. It means the metal of which anode is made, that metal must be present in the electrolyte. It means the electrolyte should be a salt of that metal. For example, if electroplating of nickel is to be done on the article, then the solution must be of the salt of nickel, like nickel sulfate. If the electroplating of silver is to be done, then the solution must contain a salt of silver. The next point that you have to remember is a slow and steady current must be passed for a long time for uniform deposition of the metal. So because if you will pass the small amount of current for long time, then the deposition of metal on the surface of the baser metal will be uniform and it will be long lasting. But if the current is not steady or a high amount of current is passed, then the deposition will not be even and smooth. So for smooth and even deposition, you have to pass small amount of current for the long time. And the last part that we have already discussed, that we have to use direct current and not alternating current in the process of electroplating. So we have already discussed this part in the previous lecture. So if you have not watched that lecture, please watch the video. I have given the link in the description below. Now the thing is electroplating of an article with nickel. How the electroplating of an article is done with the help of nickel. So similar to the examples in previous video, we have discussed some examples and I told you that you must remember three things. The first, the electrodes, the metal or the substance of which electrodes are made of. The second, electrolyte, and third, reaction at cathode and anode. So if you know about these 3 points, you will understand whole process. And you also have to remember the conditions for electroplating that we have just discussed. So the first thing I have told you about electrodes. So electrodes, there are 2 electrodes. Cathode. So cathode must be made of the article to be electroplated. So that is always same. At cathode you have to keep the article which is to be electroplated. So cathode must be made of, or at cathode you must keep the article to be electroplated. Now the second thing is anode. So what must we keep at anode? What is the condition? The metal from which electroplating is to be done, the superior metal. And which is the metal here? Nickel. So anode must be made of nickel. So electrodes are clear. The next thing is electrolyte. So I told you that electrolyte must contain a salt of nickel, the superior metal. So electrolyte is NiSO4. We are using nickel sulfate as an electrolyte here. The next thing is reaction at cathode. So reactions at cathode and anode are very easy in this process of electroplating. So you know that reaction at cathode, what will happen at cathode? Nickel ion will migrate towards cathode by gaining 2 electrons, because nickel is to be deposited on the cathode, so it will become nickel. And what is the reaction at anode? So reaction at anode, because nickel will migrate from anode to cathode. So nickel is present at anode. Nickel will undergo oxidation and will form Ni2 plus ion, and these Ni2 plus ions will migrate towards cathode. So this is the whole process. So if you will try to understand the whole process, what will happen? The nickel ions will come out from the nickel and the oxidation of nickel will take place at anode. Now these nickel ions will migrate towards cathode, and at cathode these nickel ions will be deposited in the form of nickel metal by gaining 2 electrons. So in this process the oxidation and deposition of the same metal will take place. So this is very easy to understand. Next is electroplating of an article with silver. So this time instead of nickel we will use silver for the electroplating of an article. So at cathode we always keep the article at cathode. So at cathode we will keep article to be electroplated. At anode we will keep the metal which is being used for electroplating, that is silver. So anode is silver. Now the third thing, that is electrolyte. So electrolyte must be a salt of silver. So we will use sodium argentocyanide, that is NaAgCN whole twice. So this is the electrolyte which is being used for electroplating. And then reaction at cathode. So you know that electrolyte NaAgCN whole twice will give us Na plus, then Ag plus, and then cyanide ion. Now reaction which will take place at cathode, so you know that there will be silver ions and Na plus ions in the electrolytic solution, but you know that Ag plus ion has more tendency to get reduced as compared to sodium ion. So the reaction which will take place at cathode is Ag plus, it will gain an electron and it will form silver. So silver is deposited at cathode, at article which is kept at cathode. Then the reaction at anode. So what is going to happen at anode? At anode, this is the anode. So silver metal will get oxidized at anode and it will lose one electron. So you can see that silver is oxidized at anode and it will move to cathode and then it will gain the electron and it will deposit it at cathode. So this is the process of electrolysis of electroplating of any article with the help of silver. We are using silver for electroplating this time. Now there may be a question in your examination, why do you use sodium argentocyanide and not silver nitrate for electroplating? So silver nitrate is not used for electroplating, but we use sodium argentocyanide. So what is the reason for this? Because if you use silver nitrate, it is a very strong electrolyte, so therefore there will be a high concentration of silver ion in the electrolytic solution, and therefore the rate of deposition of silver on the surface of article will be very high. So it will be deposited at very high rate, therefore there won't be a smooth and uniform deposition. So if you want a smooth and uniform deposition, we have to use this electrolyte. This electrolyte will result in a non-uniform and a rough deposition of silver metal on the surface of article which is kept at cathode. Therefore we don't use silver nitrate, instead of that we use sodium argentocyanide. So this question may be asked in your examination. The next application of electrolysis is electrorefining of metals. So now again the question is, what is the meaning of electrorefining? So electrorefining, first of all, refining means purification. So if we are talking about refining of metals, that means we are purifying the metals, and because we are talking about electrorefining, so purification of metals with the help of electrolysis is known as electrorefining. Now how the electrorefining can be done? So let's see with the help of an example, electrorefining of copper. So we have to remember same things in this, that is electrodes, then electrolyte, and then reactions at cathode and anode. So the first thing, that is anode. So anode must be made of impure metal. For example, this time we are using copper, so we have to do the refining of copper, we have to purify the copper. So impure copper that is to be purified is to be kept at anode. So the first thing, at anode you will keep impure metal which is to be purified. Then the second thing, cathode. Cathode must be thin strip of pure metal, same metal. If we are using copper, if we have to do the refining of copper, then there must be a thin strip of copper at cathode. So at cathode we will have a thin strip of copper. Then the next thing, that is electrolyte. So again electrolyte must contain the ions of same metal, so it should be a salt of same metal, because we are doing the electrorefining of copper, so we should have a salt of copper. So we are using here copper sulfate. So you know that copper sulfate will form Cu2 plus ions and SO4 2 minus ion, that is copper ion and sulfate ion. Now the reaction at anode and cathode. So from the reaction you can understand it very easily. So reaction at cathode will be copper will lose electrons and will form copper ion, and at cathode this copper ion will gain electron and gets deposited at cathode. So what happens in the whole process? You can see the anode, at anode we are keeping impure metal. So the copper is oxidized at anode and will form copper ion. Now these copper ions will move to the electrolytic solution, and from the electrolytic solution, because positive ions will move towards the cathode, so these positive ions will move towards cathode, where they will again get reduced and will deposited at cathode. Now the copper will keep moving to the electrolytic solution and then to cathode from anode. So all the pure copper will get deposited at cathode, and the impurities which are present in this bar of impure copper, they will get deposited at the bottom of anode. Therefore it is also called anode mud, because it is deposited at the bottom of anode. Why is it deposited? Because in this process electrolysis of copper will take place. Only copper will move towards the cathode, and all the impurities which are present at the anode, it will be deposited at the bottom. So this is the process of electrorefining of copper. Now there is one more application of electrolysis, and that is extraction of metals. So how the extraction of metals is done with the help of electrolysis? Extraction of metals means we extract the metal, we obtain the metal from some compound. So let's see an example, the extraction of metal from sodium chloride. So we use molten sodium chloride. In molten sodium chloride it will give Na plus and Cl minus ion. So if the electrolysis of molten sodium chloride is done, you know that the sodium ion, because it is positive ion and it is only positive ion in the electrolyte, so the sodium ions will move towards cathode, where these sodium ions will gain electron and get deposited at cathode. So the sodium metal will be obtained at cathode. Same as we have done the electrolysis of lead bromide. So you have seen in that example that lead ions migrate towards cathode and we obtain lead at cathode. So we can obtain the metal at cathode. So in this method we can easily extract the metal, and metal will always be obtained at cathode. So these are few applications of electrolysis. So this is all in this lecture. If you have any queries regarding this chapter, you can ask your questions in comment box. Thank you very much.